Sarah smiled. Uncle Robert figured it out eventually. Turns out my father had been investigating security breaches in defense contractor systems. Mr. Gray's organization was behind the breaches, and they needed to discredit Dad's investigation. Kidnapping me was supposed to force him to falsify his reports. Instead, it led to their downfall, David mused. God works in mysterious ways, Sarah said, echoing her grandmother's favorite phrase. David nodded, understanding now what that really meant. Sometimes the worst thing that could happen to you could also be the best thing, if you were willing to let it change you for the better. As he looked around the table at Sarah's family, all of whom had welcomed him despite knowing his past, David silently said a prayer of gratitude. He thanked God for the dark cabin where a young woman's faith had shined so brightly that it illuminated the path back to redemption. He thanked God for second chances, for forgiveness, and for the miraculous truth that no one is ever too lost to be found. The story of the girl who prayed for her kidnapper became legendary in their small town. But Sarah never saw it as extraordinary. To her, it was simply what her grandmother had taught her, that everyone deserves love, everyone deserves a chance at redemption, and prayer has the power to transform even the most hopeless situations into something beautiful. The operation to catch Mr. Gray and his criminal network took 3 weeks to plan and execute. During that time, David remained in federal custody, but Agent Chen allowed Sarah to visit him twice a week. These visits were unusual, but Agent Chen recognized that the bond between Sarah and David had become crucial to David's cooperation and emotional stability. During one of these visits, Sarah brought David a Bible that had belonged to her grandmother. "She would have wanted you to have this," Sarah said, placing the worn book in his hands. David traced the cover with his fingers, tears gathering in his eyes. "I don't deserve this." "Deserving has nothing to do with it," Sarah replied. "Grace isn't about what we deserve. It's about what we're given freely." The plan that Agent Chen and his team developed was complex. David would contact Mr. Gray and report that he had successfully completed the kidnapping. He would say that Sarah's father was ready to cooperate, but insisted on speaking directly with his daughter first to confirm she was safe. This would draw Mr. Gray and his associates out of hiding for what they thought would be the final exchange. The risky part was that Sarah would have to participate in the operation. She would need to appear on a video call with her father while Mr. Gray watched, convincing the criminal that everything was going according to plan. Meanwhile, FBI agents would be tracing the call and preparing to move in on Mr. Gray's location. "I don't like putting Sarah in danger again," Agent Chen told his team during one of their planning sessions. "Uncle Robert," Sarah said, having insisted on being part of the planning process, "I'm already in danger. These people know who I am, and they won't stop until they get what they want or until you stop them. At least this way, I can help end it." David, who was being held in a secure conference room during these meetings, spoke up. "I'll be with her during the video call. If anything goes wrong, if Mr. Gray suspects something, I'll make sure Sarah gets out safely." "You'll be in handcuffs," one of the other agents pointed out. "Then uncuff me for the operation," David said simply. "I know these people. I know how they think. Sarah will be safer with me free to protect her than with me restrained." "Agent." Chen looked at his niece, who nodded her agreement. Against his better judgment, he approved the plan. The day of the operation, Sarah was more nervous than she had been during her actual kidnapping. At least then, she hadn't known what was coming. Now she was fully aware of all the things that could go wrong. David, temporarily freed from his restraints but surrounded by agents, tried to reassure her. "Just remember, you're not acting. You really were kidnapped. You really are safe now, and your father really does love you. Let those truths come through, and Mr. Gray will believe everything else." The video call was set up in a room that had been made to look like the cabin where Sarah had been held. David called Mr. Gray's number. his voice steady despite the tension. In the room. It's done, David reported when Mr. Gray answered. The girl is secure, and her father is ready to cooperate. Excellent, Mr. Gray's voice came through the speakers. His accent was slight, possibly Eastern European. I want to see the girl and speak with her father simultaneously. That can be arranged, David said, following the script they had practiced. But I want my payment transferred before we proceed. Of course. Give me your account information. As David provided fake banking details, FBI technicians worked frantically to trace the call. They had only a few minutes before Mr. Gray would expect to see Sarah on camera. The video call connected, and Sarah found herself looking at a middle-aged man with graying hair and cold eyes. In a separate window, she could see her father, who was calling from his office at the Department of Defense, surrounded by FBI agents. Sarah! Her father's voice broke with emotion. Are you hurt? Have they hurt you? I'm okay, Dad, Sarah said, letting her genuine relief at seeing him show in her voice. I'm scared, but I'm okay. Mr. Gray leaned forward, studying Sarah's face through the camera. Mr. Mitchell, he addressed her father. I trust you can see that your daughter is alive. And well, now let's discuss the terms of her release. What followed was a tense negotiation, with Mr. Gray demanding access codes to classified defense systems and Sarah's father appearing to reluctantly comply. Unknown to Mr. Gray, every code he was being given was fake, designed to appear authentic, but actually leading to monitored FBI systems. This is taking too long, Mr. Gray said suddenly, his suspicion clearly growing. Something doesn't feel right. David stepped into view of the camera. Everything is fine. The girl's father is cooperating. You're getting what you wanted. Mr. Gray stared at David for a long moment. You look different, Thompson. Less, composed than usual. Sarah's heart raced. If Mr. Gray suspected something, the entire operation could collapse. Acting on instinct, she spoke up. Please, she said, her voice breaking with genuine emotion. I just want to go home. I want to see my family. The raw pain in her voice seemed to convince Mr. Gray that everything was authentic. Very touching, he said coldly. Mr. Mitchell, you have 1 hour to provide the remaining access codes. If you try to deceive me, your daughter will pay the price. The call ended, and Agent Chen immediately got on his radio. Do we have a location? Got him, came the response. Warehouse district about 20 miles from here. Teams are moving in now. The next hour was the longest of Sarah's life. She, David, and Agent Chen waited in the command center, listening to radio chatter as FBI teams surrounded Mr. Gray's location. There were several tense moments when it seemed like the criminals might escape, but eventually, Agent Chen's radio crackled with the news they had been waiting for. Suspects in custody. We got him, along with 4 associates. The operation is complete. Sarah felt her legs give out, and she sank into a chair as the relief washed over her. David, his hands cuffed again now that the operation was over, looked at her with a mixture of pride and sadness. You did great, he told her. You probably saved a lot of people today. 6 months later, Sarah sat in a federal courtroom as David was sentenced for his crimes. Thanks to his cooperation, which had led to the arrest of 12 people in the criminal network and the prevention of several other planned kidnappings, the judge agreed to the plea deal Agent Chen had negotiated. Mr. Thompson, the judge said, you have committed serious crimes that caused immeasurable pain to your victims and their families. However, your cooperation with law enforcement and your apparent genuine remorse have convinced this court that you are capable of rehabilitation. I hereby sentence you to 15 years in federal prison, with the possibility of parole in 10 years. After the sentencing, Sarah was allowed a few minutes to speak with David before he was taken away. I'll write to you, she promised. And I'll keep praying for you. Thank you, David said, his voice thick with emotion, for everything. You saved my life, Sarah. Maybe not in the way people usually mean that, but you saved the part of me that I thought was dead forever. You saved mine too, Sarah replied. You taught me that there's always hope, even in the darkest places. As Sarah watched David being led away, she thought about her grandmother's words about redemption. The old woman had been right. It wasn't about erasing the past, but about choosing to be better in the future. 5 years later, Sarah graduated from nursing school with honors. She had written to David every month throughout his imprisonment, and he had written back, sharing his progress in the prison's education and counseling programs. He had earned his GED and was working on a college degree. On the day of her graduation, Sarah received a letter from David. In it, he wrote, "I heard about your graduation from your uncle. I am so proud of you, Sarah. You are becoming the nurse you always dreamed of being, and I know you're going to help so many people. You showed me that prayer really does change things. It changed me, and through me, it changed the lives of all, the people we helped save. I still pray every day, just like you taught me. Thank you for seeing the person I could become when I couldn't see it myself." Sarah folded the letter carefully and looked up at the sky. Somewhere, she felt her grandmother smiling down at her, proud of the woman she had become and the lives she had touched through her faith and compassion. The girl who had been kidnapped and prayed had indeed shocked everyone, but not in the way anyone could have predicted. Her prayers hadn't just saved her own life, they had redeemed a lost soul and prevented countless other tragedies. Sometimes, Sarah reflected, the most powerful miracles happened not through divine intervention, but through the simple act of one human being choosing to see the humanity in another. Years later, when David was released on parole after serving 10 years, the first person he called was Sarah. She had become a head nurse at a major hospital and was married with 2 children. She invited him to dinner with her family, and as they sat around the table sharing a meal, David looked at the woman who had once been his victim and was now one of his dearest friends. "You know," he said, "I never did find out why Mr. Gray specifically targeted your family." Agent Robert Chen arrived at the cabin 3 hours later, but he didn't come alone. Sarah could see through the small window that the entire area was surrounded by FBI agents and local police. David noticed too, and for a moment, panic flashed across his face. "You said he would help?" David said, backing away from the window. "He will," Sarah assured him, though she was also nervous about the large law enforcement presence. "Just trust the process." A voice came through a megaphone outside. "This is Agent Chen with the FBI. David Thompson, I want to talk to you." David looked at Sarah one more time, then walked to the door. "I'm here," he called out. "Sarah is with me, and she's safe. I want to see both of you come out slowly with your hands visible," Agent Chen's voice continued. "David, I understand you want to cooperate. Let's make this as smooth as possible." David took a deep breath and unlocked the cabin door. Sarah stood beside him, and together they walked out into the bright afternoon sunlight. Sarah had to squint, after days in the dim cabin, but she could see her uncle standing about 50 feet away, wearing a bulletproof vest and flanked by other agents. "Sarah!" Agent Chen called out, relief evident in his voice. "Walk toward me slowly." Sarah started to move, but then stopped and looked back at David. He was standing with his hands raised, surrounded by red laser dots from multiple sniper rifles trained on him. "Go," David said quietly. "You're safe now." "Not without you," Sarah said firmly. She took his hand and began walking toward her uncle, pulling David along with her. "Sarah, let go of his hand and come here," Agent Chen instructed, his voice tense. "No," Sarah replied, surprising everyone, including herself. "He saved me, Uncle Robert. If he wanted to hurt me, he could have done it days ago. He chose not to." Agent Chen studied the situation carefully. After what seemed like an eternity, he signaled to his team to lower their weapons slightly. though they remained ready. "All right," he said, approaching them cautiously. "Let's talk." When they reached Agent Chen, Sarah finally let go of David's hand and ran to her uncle, who embraced her tightly. But she quickly turned back to David, who was now being handcuffed by other agents. "Gently," Agent Chen instructed his team. "He's cooperating." David was led to a nearby van where he was searched and questioned briefly. Meanwhile, Sarah was checked by paramedics and gave a preliminary statement to investigators. Throughout the process, she kept insisting that David had protected her and wanted to help bring down the criminal organization that had hired him. After the initial procedures, Agent Chen sat down with both Sarah and David at a makeshift command post that had been set up in the area. "David," Agent Chen began, "my niece tells me you want to cooperate. Before we go any further, you should know that anything you say can and will be used against you in court. You have the right to an attorney." "I understand," David said. "I want to tell you everything." "Uncle Robert," Sarah interrupted. "David told me he was hired to kidnap me. This wasn't random. Someone specifically wanted me taken." Agent Chen's expression grew serious. "What can you tell me about that, David?" David looked uncomfortable, but he began to speak. "I was contacted by a man who calls himself Mr. Gray. I don't know his real name, and I've never met him in person. He pays well, and he doesn't ask questions about how the job gets done." "How does he contact you?" "Encrypted phone calls, usually. Sometimes messages through intermediaries. He hired me to take Sarah and hold her until further instructions." "What were those instructions supposed to be?" Agent Chen asked. David glanced at Sarah, then back at the agent. "He was going to call me with details, but he said the family would receive a ransom demand. Not for money, though, for information." Sarah felt confused. "What information?" Agent Chen's face had gone pale. "Sarah, your father works for the Department of Defense in cybersecurity. He has access to classified systems and protocols." The pieces began falling into place for Sarah. "Someone wanted to use me to force my father to give them classified information." "That's what it sounds like," Agent Chen confirmed. He turned back to David. "What else can you tell me about this Mr. Gray and his organization?" Over the next hour, David provided everything he knew about the criminal network. He gave names, locations, methods of communication, and details about previous jobs. Agent Chen recorded everything, occasionally asking for clarification or additional details. "David," Agent Chen finally said, "the information you're providing could help us shut down a major criminal operation, but I need you to understand that you're still facing serious charges. Kidnapping carries a potential life sentence." "I know," David said quietly. "I'm not asking to walk away from this. I just want to make sure Sarah stays safe. And if I can help you stop these people from hurting others, then something good can come from all of this." Agent Chen looked at his niece, who was watching David with obvious concern. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest. Did this man hurt you or threaten you in any way?" Sarah shook her head. "No, Uncle Robert. After the first day, he treated me with respect. He shared his food with me. He listened when I talked. And he protected me when his employers wanted him to do something terrible." "Protected you how?" Sarah looked at David, who nodded for her to continue. "He was supposed to hurt me to make the ransom demand more convincing. When he refused, they threatened to send someone else to finish the job. That's when he decided to call you." Agent Chen was quiet for several minutes, processing everything he had heard. Finally, he spoke to David. "I'm going to be honest with you, David. The charges against you are serious, and there's no way around that. But if you continue to cooperate fully, if you help us capture these people and prevent future crimes, I'll recommend that the prosecutor consider a plea deal. I can't promise anything, but cooperation usually counts for something." "What kind of plea deal?" David asked. "Instead of life in prison, maybe 15 to 20 years. With good behavior, you could be out in 10 to 12 years." Sarah felt her heart sink. Even with cooperation, David would lose a large portion of his life to prison. But she also understood that he had committed serious crimes, and there had to be consequences. "I'll take it," David said without hesitation. "If it means stopping these people and keeping Sarah safe, I'll take whatever punishment you think is fair." Agent Chen nodded. "Then let's get to work. We have a lot of planning to do if we're going to catch Mr. Gray and his associates." As they began discussing the details of the undercover operation that would be needed to catch the criminal network, Sarah realized that her prayers were being answered in ways she never could have imagined. Not only was she going to survive this ordeal, but David was going to have a chance at redemption, and together they were going to help prevent other families from going through what hers had experienced. The prayer seemed to change everything between Sarah and David. After that moment of shared vulnerability, David left her hands untied and began spending hours talking with her. He told her about his childhood, about the grandmother who had tried to save him, about the years of anger and pain that had led him to a life of crime. "I started small," David explained as they sat together in the dim light of the cabin. "Shoplifting, pickpocketing. Then it escalated, breaking and entering, armed robbery, and eventually this." He gestured around the room. "Taking people." "How? Many people have you taken?" Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. David was quiet for a long time. "You're the 7th, he finally said. "But you're the first one who—" He struggled to find the words. "The first one who treated me like I was worth saving." Sarah's heart ached for all the victims who had suffered in this same room, but she also felt a deep sadness for David. 7 people had passed through his hands, and not one of them had seen past his actions to the wounded person beneath. "What happened to the others?" she asked gently. David's face darkened. "I delivered them to my employers as instructed. I never asked what happened after that, and I never wanted to know." The implications of his words hung heavy in the air between them. Sarah realized how lucky she was that David was having second thoughts. The others might not have been so fortunate. "David," she said carefully, "we need to call the police." David immediately shook his head. "You don't understand. The people I work for have connections everywhere. Police, judges, government officials. They'll know before we even hang up the phone." "Then what do we do?" David stood up and began pacing. Again, a habit Sarah had noticed when he was stressed. "I don't know. I've never been in this situation before." "What were your instructions this time?" Sarah asked. "What were you supposed to do with me?" David stopped pacing and looked at her with pain in his eyes. "I can't tell you that." "It's bad, isn't it?" David nodded slowly. "Very bad." Sarah felt a chill, but she pushed down her fear. "Then we have to find another way. We have to get help from someone these people can't reach." "Like who?" Sarah thought for a moment. "My uncle. He's an FBI agent. He works on cases involving organized crime and human trafficking." David's eyes widened. "Your uncle is FBI?" "Yes, and if anyone can help us, it's him." David shook his head vigorously. "Absolutely not. If I contact the FBI, I'll spend the rest of my life in prison." "Maybe," Sarah admitted. "But if you don't, you might not have a rest of your life to spend anywhere." They sat in silence for several minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, David spoke. "Tell me about your uncle." "His name is Robert Chen. He's my mom's brother. He's been with the FBI for 15 years, and he specializes in cases exactly like this. He's also one of the kindest, most honest people I know." "Kind and honest don't usually go together with law enforcement in my experience," David said bitterly. "Uncle, Robert is different. When I was younger and going through a rebellious phase, he never judged me. He just listened and helped me find my way. If anyone would be willing to work with you, it would be him." David considered this. "What makes you think he'd help someone like me?" "Because he believes in redemption, too. He's seen too many good people make bad choices not to. They talked through the night, with David sharing more stories from his past, and Sarah telling him about her family, her dreams, her faith. By morning, they had formed an unlikely bond built on honesty and mutual respect. When the sun came up, David made his decision. "Okay," he said, his voice shaky but determined. "I'll contact your uncle. But Sarah, you need to understand that this might not end well for either of us. These people I work for, they don't leave loose ends." "I understand," Sarah said, "but living in fear isn't really living at all. My grandmother used to say that sometimes you have to risk everything to save your soul." David smiled sadly. "Your grandmother sounds like she was a remarkable woman." "She was. And I think she'd like you." "Even after everything I've done?" "Especially after everything you've done. She always said that the people who had fallen the farthest had the most to teach us about grace." David used his phone to look up FBI contact information. When he found the number for Robert Chen's office, he stared at it for a long time before dialing. "FBI, Agent Chen's office," a woman's voice answered. "I need to speak to Agent Chen," David said, his voice barely steady. "It's about his niece, Sarah Mitchell." There was a pause. "Hold on, please." A few moments later, a man's voice came on the line. "This is Agent Chen. Who is this?" David looked at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. "My name is David Thompson. I'm the one who kidnapped your niece." The silence on the other end of the line stretched on so long that David wondered if the call had been disconnected. Finally, Agent Chen spoke. "Is Sarah safe?" "Yes, she's safe. She's here with me. She wants to talk to you." David handed the phone to Sarah, who took it with shaking hands. "Uncle Robert? Sarah! Oh God, Sarah, are you hurt?" "I'm okay," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "Uncle Robert, the man who took me, he wants to help. He wants to turn himself in and help you catch the people who hired him. Sarah, listen to me very carefully. Where are you?" Sarah looked at David, who nodded. She described their location as best she could, based on what David had told her. "I'm coming to get you," Agent Chen said. "Both of you. Don't move. Don't call anyone else. Just stay exactly where you are." "Uncle Robert," Sarah said, "please don't hurt him. He's not a bad person. He's just lost." There was another long pause. "We'll figure this out, Sarah. I promise." As Sarah handed the phone back to David, she felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. They had taken the first step toward freedom, but she knew the real test was yet to come. On the 5th day of her captivity, something shifted in David's behavior. He seemed more agitated, pacing outside her room and making frequent phone calls. Sarah could hear him arguing with someone, though she couldn't make out the specific words. His voice was stressed, sometimes angry, sometimes pleading. When he brought her breakfast that morning, his hands were shaking. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked, genuinely concerned despite her situation. David looked at her with surprise. "You're asking if I'm okay? You're the one who's been kidnapped." "You're a human being," Sarah replied simply. "You're clearly suffering." David set down the water bottle harder than necessary. "You don't know anything about suffering." "Maybe not the kind you've experienced," Sarah acknowledged. "But I know what it's like to feel hopeless. I know what it's like to wonder if God is listening when you pray." David studied her face intently. "Do you really believe God is listening to your prayers?" "Yes," Sarah said without hesitation. "Even here, even now, I believe he's listening." "Then why hasn't he rescued you?" David asked, his voice challenging but also curious. Sarah thought about this question, one that had crossed her mind many times over the past few days. Maybe rescue isn't always about being physically saved. Maybe sometimes it's about finding peace in the middle of the storm. That's a convenient answer, David said bitterly. It's not convenient at all, Sarah replied. It's actually much harder than just being rescued. It means trusting that there's a purpose even when you can't see it. David left without responding, but Sarah could see that her words had affected him. Later that afternoon, David's phone rang, and Sarah heard him answer it angrily. The conversation was louder than usual, and she could make out some of the words. I can't do it, David was saying. This is different. She's different. There was silence as the person on the other end spoke. I don't care about the money, David continued, his voice rising. Find someone else. More silence, then David's voice again, sounding desperate. You don't understand. This girl, she's been praying for me, actually praying for me, not just for herself. Sarah's heart pounded as she realized David was talking about her to whoever had hired him. This wasn't random. Someone had paid him to kidnap her. But why? The conversation continued for several more minutes, with David becoming increasingly agitated. Finally, she heard him yell, I'm done with this, followed by the sound of his phone being thrown against the wall. A few minutes later, David burst into her room. His face was flushed with anger and something else. Fear, maybe. Why are you praying for me? He demanded. Sarah looked at him calmly, despite her racing heart. Because everyone deserves to be prayed for. Even kidnappers? Even criminals? Especially them, Sarah said. Those are the people who need prayers the most. David ran his hands through his hair, pacing back and forth in the small room. You don't understand. I was hired to do this. This wasn't personal. Someone paid me to take you. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Who? Why? I don't know why, David said, his voice breaking. I never ask why. I just do the job and get paid. But you... He stopped pacing and looked at her. You've been treating me like I'm human. You've been praying for me. How am I supposed to... He didn't finish the sentence, but Sarah understood. Whatever he had been paid to do to her, her kindness and prayers, were making it impossible for him to follow through. David, Sarah said softly, it's not too late to make a different choice. You don't understand, David repeated, collapsing onto one of the boxes. These people I work for, they don't accept failure. If I don't complete this job, they'll come after me. And probably after you anyway. Then we need to find another way, Sarah said. David laughed bitterly. We? There is no we. You're my victim, remember? I don't feel like your victim, Sarah said honestly. I feel like someone who's been placed in your life for a reason. David stared at her for a long moment. What kind of reason? Maybe to show you that you're not as lost as you think you are, Sarah suggested. Maybe to help you find your way back to the person you were meant to be. I was meant to be in foster care, bouncing from home to home, never belonging anywhere, David asked sarcastically. No, Sarah said firmly. You were meant to be loved. You were meant to matter. Just because you lost your way doesn't mean you can't find it again. David was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I haven't prayed in 20 years. It's never too late to start again, Sarah said gently. I wouldn't even know what to say. Just speak from your heart. God doesn't need fancy words. David looked at her with something that might have been hope. Would you pray with me? Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. Of course. David untied her hands for the first time since that first day. Sarah rubbed her wrists, grateful for the circulation returning to her fingers. Then she reached out and took David's hands in hers. Dear God, she began, her voice steady despite her emotions. We come to you as broken people in need of your grace. We don't understand why things happen the way they do, but we trust that you have a plan. David's hands were trembling in hers, and she could see tears rolling down his cheeks. Please forgive David for the choices he's made, Sarah continued. Help him to forgive himself. Show him the path forward, and give him the courage to take it. When Sarah finished, David was crying openly. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry for everything." "I know," Sarah said, squeezing his hands. "And I forgive you." For the first time since her ordeal began, Sarah felt a glimmer of real hope, not just for her own rescue, but for something far more important, the healing of a broken soul. The first day in captivity was the longest of Sarah's life. The man, who never told her his name, brought her water and a piece of stale bread around noon. He didn't speak to her except to grunt instructions, when he untied her hands so she could eat. Sarah noticed that her fingernails had left deep scratches on his face from their struggle in the parking lot. Sarah tried to engage him in conversation, hoping to humanize herself in his eyes. "What's your name?" she asked softly. "Why are you doing this?" The man just stared at her with cold, empty eyes. He was probably in his 30s, with dark hair and a beard that looked like it hadn't been trimmed in weeks. His clothes were dirty, and he smelled like he hadn't showered in days. There was something broken about him, something that made Sarah feel both afraid and surprisingly a little sad. "I have a family," Sarah continued, even though he wasn't responding. "My parents will be looking for me. The police will be looking for me." At the mention of police, the man's expression changed. His jaw tightened and he quickly retied her hands, this time more roughly than before. He left the room without saying a word, slamming the door so hard that dust fell from the ceiling. Alone again, Sarah tried to assess her situation. The rope around her wrists was tight, but she might be able to work it loose over time. The window was small and high up, probably too small for her to climb through even if she could reach it. The door was solid wood and locked from the outside. She was trapped, but she refused to give up hope. As the hours passed, Sarah found herself praying almost constantly. She prayed for strength, for wisdom, for a chance to escape. But mostly, she prayed for her family. She imagined how worried her parents must be, how they were probably not sleeping or eating, how they were depending on the police to find her. When darkness fell again, the man returned with more water and another piece of bread. This time, Sarah tried a different approach. "You don't look like a bad person," she said quietly. "You look like someone who's hurting." The man froze, the water bottle halfway to her lips. For just a moment, Sarah saw something flicker in his eyes. Pain, maybe, or regret. But then the cold mask returned. "Shut up," he said, his voice rough and unused to speaking. "I'm praying for you," Sarah said, ignoring his command. "I don't know why you took me, but I'm praying that you'll find peace." The man stared at her for a long moment, then turned and left without another word. That night, Sarah heard him moving around the cabin, pacing back and forth. Sometimes she could hear him talking on the phone, though she couldn't make out the words. Other times, she heard what sounded like crying. The sound made her heart ache, even for this man who had stolen her freedom. The next morning brought a change in routine. Instead of just bringing her food and leaving, the man sat down on one of the boxes across from her. He studied her face as if trying to figure something out. "Why aren't you afraid of me?" he asked suddenly. Sarah considered, her answer carefully. "I am afraid," she said honestly, "but I'm not afraid of you as a person. I'm afraid of what you might do. There's a difference." The man frowned, clearly not expecting this response. "My grandmother always told me that everyone has goodness inside them," Sarah continued. "She said some people just bury it so deep that they forget it's there." "Your grandmother sounds like she was naive," the man said bitterly. "Maybe," Sarah agreed. "But she was also the strongest person I ever knew. She survived things that would have broken other people, and she never lost her faith in humanity." The man was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer. "I had a grandmother like that once. It was the first personal thing he had shared, and Sarah felt a tiny spark of hope. Maybe she could reach him after all. "What happened to her?" Sarah asked gently. The man's face hardened again. "She died. Just like everything good in this world dies." He stood up abruptly and left the room, but this time he didn't slam the door. Over the next few days, their conversations became longer. Sarah learned that the man's name was David and that he had grown up in foster care after his parents died in a car accident when he was 8. His grandmother had tried to get custody of him, but she was too old and sick to care for a child. David had been moved from home to home, some good, some terrible. "I was angry for so long," David told her one evening as he brought her dinner. "Angry at God, angry at the world, angry at myself." "What changed?" Sarah asked. David's laugh was bitter. "Nothing changed. I just got tired of being angry and became empty instead." Sarah's heart broke for this broken man, even though he was her captor. She could see the hurt child hiding behind his cold exterior, and she understood that his cruelty came from a place of deep pain. "It's not too late," she said softly. "You can still choose to do the right thing." David shook his head. "You don't understand. I've done things, terrible things. There's no going back for people like me." "There's always a way back," Sarah insisted. "My grandmother used to say that redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about choosing to be better in the future." That night, Sarah prayed harder than she ever had before. She prayed not just for her own safety, but for David's soul. She prayed that somehow, some way, this terrible situation could be transformed into something that would heal both of them. She had no idea that her prayers were about to be answered in the most unexpected way possible. Sarah Mitchell had always been careful. At 19, she worked the evening shift at the local diner in her small town of Millbrook. Her manager always told the staff to be cautious when walking to their cars after dark, especially the young, women. But on that cold October night, Sarah thought she was safe. The parking lot was well lit, and her car was parked just 30 feet from the back door. She finished cleaning the last table and said goodbye to her coworker, Maria. The restaurant was empty except for them, and the clock on the wall showed 10:45 p.m. Sarah grabbed her purse and jacket from behind the counter. She had been working at Pete's Diner for 8 months now, saving money for college. Her parents had always taught her to work hard for what she wanted, and Sarah was determined to become a nurse. As she pushed open the back door, the cold air hit her face. October in Millbrook was always chilly, and tonight felt especially cold. She pulled her jacket tighter and walked quickly toward her old Honda Civic. The parking lot was quiet, with only the sound of her footsteps echoing off the pavement. Sarah was thinking about her upcoming midterm exams when she heard footsteps behind her. At first, she thought it might be Maria leaving too, but when she turned around, she saw a tall man in dark clothing walking toward her. Something about his movement made her nervous. He was walking too fast, and he seemed to be heading directly for her. Her heart started beating faster. Sarah quickened her pace, fumbling in her purse for her car keys. The man behind her also picked up speed. Now she was sure he was following her. She could hear his heavy breathing getting closer. Sarah broke into a run, but her car still seemed so far away. Just as she reached her car door, she felt a strong hand grab her shoulder. Sarah screamed as loud as she could, but the parking lot was empty. The man was much stronger than her, and, despite her struggles, he dragged her away from her car. She tried to fight back, kicking and clawing, but he was too powerful. "Please, don't hurt me," Sarah pleaded, her voice shaking with terror. "I don't have much money, but you can take whatever I have." The man didn't respond. Instead, he pulled out a piece of cloth and tried to cover her mouth. Sarah managed to bite his hand, and he cursed loudly. She used this moment to scream again, hoping someone would hear her. But the diner was in an industrial part of town, and most businesses were closed at this hour. The struggle continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Sarah fought with everything she had, remembering the self-defense classes her father had insisted she take. She managed to scratch the man's face and kick him hard in the shin, but eventually, exhaustion took over, and the man succeeded in restraining her. He forced her into a dark van that was parked nearby. Sarah realized this had been planned. He had been watching her, waiting for the right moment. As the van door slammed shut, Sarah found herself in complete darkness. Her hands were tied behind her back, and her mouth was covered with tape. The van started moving, and Sarah tried to stay calm despite her terror. She could hear the man talking on a phone, but his voice was muffled and she couldn't make out the words. She tried to figure out which direction they were heading, but soon lost track as the van made several turns. Sarah's mind raced with questions. Why had this happened to her? What did this man want? Where was he taking her? She thought about her parents, who would be worried sick when she didn't come home. She thought about Maria, who would find her car still in the parking lot the next morning. As the van continued driving through the night, Sarah began to pray. She had grown up in a religious family, and her grandmother had always told her that prayer was the most powerful tool anyone could have. Sarah had never been in a situation where she felt so helpless, so completely at the mercy of someone else. She prayed for her safety, for her family, and strangely, even for the man who had taken her. Her grandmother had taught her that everyone was capable of change, that even the worst people could find redemption if they opened their hearts. Sarah didn't understand why she was praying for her kidnapper, but something deep inside told her it was the right thing to do. The van finally stopped after what felt like several hours. Sarah heard the man get out and walk around to the back. When he opened the doors, she could see that they were in some kind of wooded area. There were no lights anywhere, and the only sound was the wind rustling through the trees. The man pulled her out of the van roughly, and Sarah stumbled as her legs, numb from sitting in one position for so long, refused to support her properly. He led her toward what looked like an old cabin hidden among the trees. The building was small and run down, with broken windows and peeling paint. Inside, the cabin was even worse than it looked from outside. There was no electricity, and the man used a flashlight to navigate through the rooms. He pushed Sarah into a small back room and tied her to a chair. The room smelled musty and damp, and Sarah could hear small animals scurrying around in the walls. After securing her restraints, the man left the room, locking the door behind him. Sarah was alone in the darkness, more frightened than she had ever been in her life, but instead of giving in to despair, she continued to pray. She prayed with an intensity she had never experienced before, pouring out her heart to God and asking for strength to survive whatever was coming. Hours passed, and Sarah dozed fitfully in the chair. When morning came, light filtered through a small, dirty window, and she could see her surroundings more clearly. The room was barely larger than a closet, with nothing in it except the chair she was tied to and some old boxes stacked in the corner. Sarah realized that her survival might depend on staying strong mentally and spiritually. She began to pray, not just for herself, but for everyone she loved, and for the man who had brought her here. Something told her that prayer would be her lifeline in the dark days ahead.